The war ended, but the banks survived. The same financial institutions that funded the Nazi war machine are now pillars of global stability. What if they were never punished, because they were never truly seen? Berlin, July 1931. The city swelters under a summer sun. But inside a quiet office near the Tiergarten, the air is heavy with smoke and calculation. 3 men sit at a polished table. One is German, a representative of the Reichsbank, nervous, twitching. The second, American, calm, cigarette burning down as he flips through papers marked with names like Kreditanstalt and Dresdner Bank. The third is British, charming, polished, detached. His briefcase carries the crest of the Bank of England. This is no ordinary meeting. Germany is bleeding cash. Its economy is collapsing. Foreign loans, especially American ones, have been keeping the country on life support since the end of World War I. Now, those lifelines are vanishing. The Great Depression is sweeping the world. And the bankers? They've come not to rescue Germany, but to decide how to let it fall. They agree to cut off credit, quietly, efficiently. They shake hands. And within weeks, Germany's largest banks collapse. Unemployment explodes. Breadlines form. Anger boils. And in the chaos, a frustrated man with a toothbrush mustache finds his moment: Adolf Hitler. But here's the question no one dared ask back then, and few dare whisper even now. What if the rise of Hitler wasn't just a political fluke, or the outcome of Treaty of Versailles humiliation? What if it was a financial design, set in motion by powerful banking interests who believed they could control the fire they'd lit? In history, textbooks, wars are often told through generals and flags: Hitler, Churchill, Stalin. But beneath those headlines flows a quieter current: money. Behind every tank, every plane, every speech on the radio, there is a bank. Check. A transaction. A signature on a loan document. In the 1920s, Germany's Weimar Republic was reeling. Crushed by the burden of war reparations, it needed foreign capital. And it got it, from New York and London. Through intricate deals crafted by J.P. Morgan, the Dawes Plan of 1924 injected billions into Germany. But this wasn't charity. It was profit. American banks earned massive interest. German factories revived. But the loans were short-term, and the repayment obligations brutal. It was a system rigged to collapse. When the Wall Street crash of 1929 shattered global markets, the credit dried up overnight. Germany's economy imploded. And who stepped in, offering stability and national pride? Hitler. In 1932, 1 in 3 Germans was unemployed. Inflation made life unbearable. People didn't vote for Hitler because of ideology. They voted because they were starving, and he promised food, jobs, and revenge. But here's the twist. Hitler's rise was not just enabled by despair. It was funded by some of the very interests that claimed to oppose him. From the American oil giant Standard Oil to banking networks tied to the House of Morgan, a web of capital flowed into Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Sometimes overtly, sometimes through Swiss intermediaries, sometimes cloaked in neutral business. And as Hitler rose, so too did the profits. Take IG Farben, the massive German chemical conglomerate that produced everything from synthetic rubber to Zyklon B, the rat used in death camps. It had deep ties to American firms, General Motors, DuPont, and Standard Oil. Joint ventures continued well into the war. It wasn't just business, it was complicity. So the question echoes again. Was World War II engineered by banks? Maybe not in the way a general plans a battle, but in the shadows, through debt agreements, raw material transfers, and cold, hard profit motives. Finance didn't just fund the war, it structured it. And when the bombs stopped falling and the trials began, most bankers weren't in the docks at Nuremberg. They were in boardrooms, preparing for reconstruction and the next opportunity. The truth was buried, quietly, elegantly, behind words like neutrality, commercial necessity, and post-war stability. But the facts remain. The money trail exists. And over the next hour, this story will follow that trail, from Manhattan boardrooms to Berlin banks, from Swiss vaults to Polish battlegrounds, revealing a chilling possibility. That the greatest war in history wasn't just fought by nations, it was bankrolled, built, and perhaps even brokered by banks. The year is 1919. The guns of the First World War have gone silent, but peace is an illusion. Germany is on its knees, Cities lie in ruins. Millions of men are dead or wounded. And at Versailles, the victors hand down a sentence: reparations. Over 130 billion gold marks, more than any nation had ever been asked to pay. The German delegation protests. Economist John Maynard Keynes calls it a Carthaginian peace, warning it will destroy Europe's future. But the Allies, especially France and Britain, are drowning in their own war debts, and they need Germany to pay up. It's a chain of financial desperation. The US lent to Britain and France to fund the war. Britain and France must pay America back. They pressure Germany to pay reparations to fund their repayments. But Germany can't. Its economy is shattered. So what happens? Germany borrows from American banks to pay reparations that Britain and France use to repay the US. It is a financial carousel, elegant, fragile, doomed. By the early 1920s, Germany's mark is worth less. A loaf of bread costs billions. Wheelbarrows of currency are needed to buy food. Children play with stacks of paper money in the streets. Hyperinflation isn't just economic failure, it's national humiliation. Veterans beg, teachers starve, middle-class families lose everything overnight. Into this chaos step the bankers. The Dawes Plan of 1924, spearheaded by American financiers like Charles Dawes and backed by J.P. Morgan, restructures Germany's debt. Billions in U.S. loans flow into German banks, industries, and infrastructure. Factories reopen, unemployment falls, Berlin blooms. For a moment, it looks like recovery. But this recovery isn't real. It's built on short-term loans, unstable markets, and an illusion of stability. Germany is mortgaging its future for a breath of normalcy. And the people know it. In 1929, the Young Plan replaces Dawes. It stretches out Germany's payments over 59 years. On paper, it's a solution. In reality, it locks Germany into a lifetime of debt. Then, disaster strikes. The Wall Street crash. October 1929. Markets implode. Banks fail. Panic spreads like wildfire. American financiers pull their loans from Germany overnight. The carousel stops, and Germany collapses. By 1932, 6 million Germans are unemployed. Hunger riots break out. Savings vanish. The Weimar government, already fragile, becomes a symbol of impotence. The stage is set, and in the wings waits a man who promises to tear it all down. Meanwhile, the rest of the world spirals into its own crisis. The United States faces the Great Depression. Britain struggles with debt. France turns inward. And in the shadows, financial elites focus not on preventing war, but on managing risk and salvaging assets. Back in Berlin, the rage builds. Among the middle class, those who lost the most in the collapse, there is no faith in democracy. They want order, stability, pride. In 1930, the Nazi Party surges to become the second largest in the Reichstag. Their message? Simple. We were betrayed. International finance has crushed us. Germany will rise again. But here's what history forgets. The Nazi Party's rise would have been impossible without the economic devastation triggered by the collapse of foreign lending. And that collapse was no accident. It was the logical outcome of a system designed to extract profit, not preserve peace. The banks didn't pull their loans because of ideology. They did it to protect themselves. But the effect was the same. They created a vacuum, and Hitler filled it. In 1933, he takes power. And almost immediately, foreign banks begin to reopen channels. New deals, quiet partnerships, technology transfers, oil shipments. It's not about politics, it's about business. The engine of war is starting to hum, and once again, finance is oiling its gears. But the worst is still ahead. New York, 1924. The floor of the stock exchange buzzes with energy. The war is over. The money is flowing. And for American banks, Europe isn't a disaster zone. It's an investment opportunity. In Manhattan boardrooms, men in suits see numbers, not ruins. Germany, though beaten and broken, has resources, industry, and desperation. A perfect market. Leading the charge is J.P. Morgan Company. Their influence runs deep, their reputation global. And when Charles Dawes, a Chicago banker turned diplomat, proposes a plan to stabilize Germany's economy, Wall Street listens. The Dawes Plan isn't about charity, it's about loans, massive loans. American investors pour billions into Germany, underwriting bonds, rebuilding factories, and backing German banks. For a time, it works. Railroads hum again. Steel flows. Berlin becomes a symbol of rebirth, but behind the success is a trap. The loans are short-term, the interest rates are steep, and much of the money doesn't stay in Germany. It flows out in the form of reparations. Germany becomes a pass-through ACC, UNT. American cash in, reparation payments out. It's a house of cards. Still, Wall Street profits, bonds sell fast. The myth of recovery takes hold. But Germany isn't being rebuilt, it's being rented. By 1928, U.S. loans make up over 70% of Germany's foreign capital. The country is hooked, and when Wall Street sneezes, the Weimar Republic catches pneumonia. The gamble is simple: inject capital, collect returns, pull out before the crash. But this isn't a market correction. This is a nation's fate, and when the crash comes, it will tear open a wound wide enough for extremism to march through. It began as a diplomatic rescue mission, but ended as an entanglement. In 1924, the Dawes Plan was hailed as a triumph of international cooperation. Americans, Germans, and Europeans called it a blueprint for peace. But beneath the public celebration lay a structure as fragile as glass. Germany agreed to resume reparations payments, scaled back to manageable levels. In return, the U.S. provided hefty loans to jumpstart the German economy. Britain and France accepted the deal reluctantly, fearing it would make Germany stronger. But they needed the money too. Their economies were tethered to German payments, which they used to repay their own war debts to America. It was a closed loop. America lends to Germany, Germany pays reparations to allies, allies repay America. This wasn't peace, it was a debt merry-go-round. 5 years later, the Young Plan of 1929 tried to fix it. Named after American businessman Owen D. Young, it reduced Germany's total reparation bill and extended payments over decades. Again, U.S. banks guaranteed the bonds. But critics saw the danger. The deeper Germany's debt, the more it depended on foreign banks. Economic sovereignty was slipping away. In Germany, resentment simmered. The payments were humiliating. Nationalists fumed. The Nazi Party called it financial slavery, and their message resonated. Even British economists like Keynes warned these plans would sow the dragon's teeth of future conflict. They were right. When the global economy crashed, the entire web collapsed. Loans dried up, payments stopped. And the delicate trust between nations unraveled, revealing that beneath the diplomacy was debt. And beneath the debt, rage. Hjalmar Schacht wore a banker's smile and carried a politician's knife. To the public, he was Germany's economic savior, a cool-headed financial wizard who had tamed hyperinflation and restored trust in the mark. But behind closed doors, Schacht was something far more dangerous, a bridge between global finance and fascism. A former Reichsbank president, Schacht rose to power in the 1920s by stabilizing Germany's currency. Foreign bankers admired him. He spoke their language, literally and figuratively. To Wall Street and the Bank of England, he was the good German, a man they could do business with. But Schacht was also a nationalist. He saw democracy as weak, reparations as theft, and Hitler as a tool. In 1933, after Hitler seized power, Schacht returned to the Reichsbank and began engineering a miracle. But this miracle was built on lies. Schacht created Mefo bills, a shadowy credit system that allowed Germany to fund massive rearmament without triggering international panic. The bills were secret, untraceable promissory notes, backed not by gold or tax revenue, but by the promise of future war profits. Germany spent billions on weapons, troops, and tanks, while still pretending to honor the Versailles restrictions. International bankers looked the other way. Schacht made sure foreign debt payments continued. Germany seemed stable. In reality, it was rearming at an industrial scale. Schacht's genius was deception. He kept the financial world calm while preparing the battlefield. Some say he believed he could control Hitler. That hit out. Lehr would serve the economy, not the other way around. He was wrong. But by the time he realized it, the Reich was marching and the money had already flowed. In the shadows of diplomacy and commerce, the Nazi rise wasn't just tolerated, it was financed. From 1931 to 1933, as Germany teetered between collapse and chaos, a network of industrialists, bankers, and foreign firms quietly placed bets on Hitler, not for ideology, but for profit and for order. German steel magnates feared communism more than fascism. Foreign investors wanted stability over democracy. And Hitler, he offered both. In January 1933, a secret meeting took place at the Cologne villa of banker Kurt von Schröder. Attending were top German financiers and industrialists, men representing IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens. The goal? Convince President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as chancellor. Days later, it happened. But the money wasn't just German. Across the Atlantic, American corporations maintained dealings with Germany, even as Hitler consolidated power. IBM leased punch card machines that enabled the Nazi census, and later, the tracking of Jews. Ford maintained its German subsidiary, producing vehicles for the Reich. General Motors, through Opel, helped modernize the Wehrmacht. Some executives claimed ignorance, others were silent. Even Wall Street had its channels. The Union Banking Corporation, where Prescott Bush, grandfather of a future U.S. president, sat on the board, was later investigated for holding assets tied to German industry. The firm was seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1942. It wasn't treason, it was business, profitable business. Behind closed doors, Hitler was seen not as a threat, but as a stabilizer, a man who could restore order and crush leftist movements. And as long as contracts were honored and payments flowed, the banks didn't ask questions. Not yet. A tank doesn't move without fuel. A plane doesn't fly without oil. And in the 1930s, Nazi Germany had neither in sufficient supply, yet by 1939, Hitler's war machine was fully operational. How? The answer lies in Texas oil fields, New Jersey laboratories, and transatlantic deals that should never have happened. At the heart of it, Standard Oil led by the Rockefellers, and their German partner, IG Farben. Germany, short on crude oil, needed synthetic fuel, created through hydrogenation, a complex process IG Farben had been developing, but they lacked the patents, which were held by Standard Oil. In 1934, a secret agreement was struck. Standard Oil transferred exclusive rights and technologies to IG Farben in exchange for a financial stake. The arrangement was so sensitive that details were hidden even from some U.S. government officials. It didn't stop there. During the mid-1930s, shipments of refined oil tetraethyl lead used in aviation fuel and other petroleum products continued flowing into Germany, much of it indirectly routed through neutral countries or intermediaries like Switzerland. Even as Germany prepared for war, American oil helped keep its engines running. Meanwhile, Standard Oil enjoyed access to Farben patents and a share of synthetic fuel profits. Blind to, or unconcerned with, their role in arming a future enemy. When war finally erupted in 1939, U.S. intelligence scrambled to track how much of Germany's fuel network could be traced to American hands. The findings were unsettling. Germany could not have launched a modern war without the very fuel and know-how provided by its supposed adversaries. And now, the fires were lit. Dawn breaks on September 1st, 1939. The low whine of Stuka dive bombers pierces the sky over Poland. On the ground, tanks roar across fields, crushing fences, barns, and borders alike. Civilians run. Soldiers dig and World War II has begun. But in New York and London, there is no roar, no bombs, only silence. The same financial institutions that spent years underwriting Germany's recovery, now what? Shake the war. They helped prepare explode, banks issue no statements, CEOs do not speak. There are no public condemnations from the boardrooms that once funded German industry because the truth is too close, too recent. Some companies still have contracts. Some still have German assets. Others fear their involvement might surface. So, as Warsaw burns, they go quiet. In Poland, the destruction is immediate and overwhelming. Warsaw's currency reserves, once held in Swiss and French banks, are frozen. Refugees flood the roads, and the Wehrmacht, fueled by synthetic gasoline and powered by vehicles once tied to foreign firms, moves with ruthless precision. And yet, behind it all, paperwork. Transactions. Contracts that still bind nations together in awkward silence. The Bank for International Settlements continues to process payments from Germany, even as German tanks flatten Polish cities. The war is no longer hypothetical, no longer diplomatic. But the money doesn't care, it still moves. And the men who once saw Hitler as a bulwark against Bolshevism now face a bitter truth. They financed a monster, yet most remain silent. Because to speak is to admit complicity. In Lisbon, the streets are quiet, but the cafes hum with whispers. In Stockholm, the snow falls gently, but safes clink with gold. In Zurich, in Geneva, in Buenos Aires, cities untouched by bombs become silent trading posts for war. While soldiers die by the thousands and entire towns vanish beneath artillery, the money never stops moving. It simply changes addresses. In neutral cities, businessmen gather in private clubs. Swiss bankers sip wine alongside Nazi liaisons. London and New York financiers fly in discreetly, sometimes via Spain or Portugal, avoiding official scrutiny. The war, to them, is not a moral tragedy. It's a market disruption. And where there's disruption, there's opportunity. As Germany storms through Europe, looting national treasures and stripping Jewish families of wealth, the Reich needs a place to store its plunder. Swiss banks offer quiet vaults and ironclad secrecy. Billions in gold, currency, and artwork flow through these cities, laundered behind layers of neutrality. Often the origins are known. Often no one cares. Back home, propaganda fuels public sacrifice. Buy war bonds. Ration food. Do your part. But in the shadows, war is becoming big business. And neutrality is not about peace. It's about access. German diplomats in Lisbon throw lavish parties. Allied spies sit in the same rooms. Everyone watches, smiles, nods. Information is traded, so is money. In the war's official narrative, these cities don't exist. But in reality, they are its lungs, quietly keeping the bloodstream of finance alive, even as Europe bleeds. Beneath the Alps, in vaults cut deep into the rock, Nazi gold sleeps. Switzerland, proudly neutral, fiercely private, sits at the crossroads of Europe, and during World War II it becomes the central clearinghouse of stolen wealth. As Hitler's forces sweep through Poland, France, Belgium, and the Soviet Union, the Reich plunders with methodical precision. National treasuries, private banks, Jewish families, gold teeth from concentration camp victims, confiscated jewelry, central bank reserves seized at gunpoint, all of it melted, refined, and marked with false origins. Then it's shipped, often by rail or guarded convoy, to Swiss banks. There, it becomes untraceable, legal, spendable. The Swiss National Bank receives over $40 million in Nazi gold during the war, over $8 billion in today's terms. Some of it they knew was stolen, much of it they didn't ask about. Swiss neutrality made it easy. Their central position allowed them to trade with both sides. Their banking secrecy laws ensured no questions were asked. And so, as Allied troops fight for every inch of Europe, Germany quietly pays for imports. Tungsten from Spain, oil from Romania, technology from Sweden, using gold parked safely in Zurich and Bern. American intelligence is aware. Reports from 1943 and 1944 flag unusual transactions and request surveillance. But the war effort takes precedence. The banking relationships remain untouched. Later, under pressure, Swiss officials insist they were just doing business. But to the survivors, the families of the murdered, and the nations gutted by war, the message is clear. Swiss banks didn't just hold the Reich's gold, they helped fund its war, and the vault doors stayed shut for decades. In Basel, Switzerland, behind a quiet, unmarked building, sits the most powerful bank the world had never heard of. The Bank for International Settlements, BIS, was founded in 1930 to handle post-World War I reparations. But during World War II, it became something else entirely. A financial Switzerland within Switzerland. Neutral, not just in politics but in purpose. Inside, central bankers from warring nations, Germany, Britain, France, the United States, continued meeting, sometimes in person, sometimes via telegram. And even as bombs fell over London and Berlin, their accounts remained active. The Reichsbank, under Hjalmar Schacht and later Walter Funk, used BIS as a back channel into move reserves, receive payments, and protect assets. The bank held Nazi gold and cleared transactions on behalf of Germany, even after the invasion of multiple European nations. Incredibly, the BIS also held funds belonging to Czechoslovakia, which the Nazis looted after occupation. The BIS processed the transfer, no questions, no objections. Allies knew. In 1904, British economist and diplomat John Maynard Keynes proposed dissolving the BIS at the Bretton Woods Conference, calling it a bank of crimey, NOLs. But the Americans objected. The U.S. Treasury, fearing the collapse of post-war financial stability, argued for continuity, and so the BIS was spared. It quietly endured the war, untouched and unpunished. Its staff claimed they were neutral, merely following instructions, just technicians of finance. But the truth is harder to ignore. While millions died, the BIS kept the books balanced. In the war's bloodiest chapter, one institution remained above it all, silent, calculating, and utterly unaccountable. Vienna, March 1938. German troops marched through the streets to thunderous applause. The Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, is complete. And as Nazi banners unfurl across the city, one of Europe's most powerful banking dynasties is dismantled overnight. The Rothschilds, symbols of Jewish financial success, are now enemies of the Reich. Baron Louis von Rothschild, heir to the Austrian branch of the legendary family, is arrested. Not tried, not charged, held as a hostage. His crime? Wealth, influence, Jewish blood. SS officers seize the family's palatial estate. Art is stolen. Securities vanish. Bank assets are nationalized. The Rothschild Bank, once a cornerstone of European finance, is absorbed into the Nazi-controlled Kreditanstalt. The family is forced to pay a release ransom, tens of millions of francs, to free Louis from Nazi captivity. It works. He escapes to exile, but the house never recovers. To the Nazis, the fall of the Rothschilds was symbolic. A strike against the mythic Jewish banker. Propaganda weaponized the family name, distorting centuries of financial legacy into hate-filled caricatures. But behind the symbolism lay a deeper irony. Just years earlier, international financiers, including the Rothschilds, had supported post-WWII German recovery. Their banks had stabilized currencies, underwritten peace, and maintained a belief in cooperation. Now, that trust was ashes. The very system that once relied on cross-border financial partnerships was devouring itself, and those who wilted. The Rothschilds fled, their art scattered, their homes confiscated, their legacy twisted. And in the smoldering ruins of their estate, one truth remained. Even the masters of money were not safe from the storm they tried to contain. October 1945, Nuremberg, Germany. Inside a courtroom still bearing the scars of war, the world watches as the architects of destruction face justice. Hermann Göring, Albert Speer, Rudolf Hess, the faces of Nazi horror sit behind glass, charged with crimes against humanity. But one group is conspicuously absent: the bankers. While generals and propagandists take the stand, most of the financial minds behind the Nazi machine avoid the spotlight. Few are indicted, few are still convicted. A handful stand trial during a lesser-known proceeding, the Ministries case, where officials from the Reichsbank and economic ministries face questioning. Among them, Walter Funk, former Reichsbank president and BIS director. He's accused of helping fund the Nazi regime and facilitate the theft of Jewish property. He's convicted, sentenced to life, but quietly released after a few years due to ill health. No Wall Street banker is called to testify. No executives from IG Farben's American partners are publicly examined. The U.S. government, now focused on rebuilding Europe, deems it counterproductive to dig too deep. Classified documents about wartime corporate ties remain sealed. Some won't be released for decades. And so a line is drawn. The war criminals are those who wore uniforms. The ones who wore suits walk free. Justice is delivered, but not completely. Because in the ledgers, those quiet typed records of transfers, contracts, and shipments, lies another kind of evidence that was never introduced. Because to do so would mean questioning not just how the war was fought, but who helped pay for it. After the ashes settled, the race for BR Ains began. With Europe in ruins, the US and the Soviet Union scrambled to capture Nazi scientists, engineers, and strategists, not to punish them, but to use them. This effort had a name: Operation Paperclip. Under this covert program, more than 100 German specialists, including members of the SS and war criminals, were secretly brought to America. They were given new identities, sanitized records, and prestigious jobs in US military and aerospace programs. Among them, Wernher von Braun, architect of the V-2 rocket that killed thousands in London, soon to become a father of NASA's space program. But the operation wasn't limited to scientists. The silence extended to financiers. Just as Paperclip whitewashed Nazi science, quiet policies shielded Western firms from accountability. The US government, eager to rebuild Europe and avoid exposing corporate complicity, chose not to prosecute many American and British firms that had maintained Nazi-era ties. Some executives were investigated, most were not. Documents were buried, archives classified. When reporters inquired about wartime contracts, about oil shipments, patent deals, and joint ventures, the answers were vague or missing altogether. The official line: focus on the future, don't disrupt economic stability, don't revisit the past. Meanwhile, former Nazi-connected businessmen resurfaced across post-war Europe, in boardrooms, in parliaments, even in central banks. It was, in effect, a financial amnesty. Because the Cold War was coming, and in that new conflict, what mattered wasn't guilt. It was utility. And so the reckoning never came. The silence was not a lapse in justice. It was a decision. Munich, 1946. The rubble has cooled, the Reich is gone, but the scars remain, on the streets, in the mines, and in the hospitals. In a makeshift clinic near the bombed-out train station, Dr. Marta Weiss tends to a boy who hasn't spoke. Since the firebombing. He's one of thousands, malnourished, shell-shocked, orphaned. Down the road, a crowd gathers at the reopened headquarters of Deutsche Bank. The windows are new, the books are balanced, the board is full. The war killed millions, but the bank survived. Among the ruins, survivors begin to ask questions. Not just what happened, but who allowed it? And why are so many of the men in tailored suits, men who enabled the war with their pens and their balance sheets, still employed? Deutsche Bank, Dresdner Bank, and other financial giants had financed Nazi expansion, seized Jewish accounts, and helped manage the economics of genocide. During the war, they even funded the construction of facilities at Auschwitz. Now, post-war tribunals file reports. Some lower-level executives are fined. A few lose their positions. But most return quietly to their roles. American occupiers, preoccupied with Soviet threats, urge economic stability over justice. And so, the trauma of war becomes a whisper behind closed doors. For the German people, especially survivors and refugees, the betrayal is personal. They lost homes, children, names, yet those who wrote the checks, the financiers who kept the war machine alive, remain faceless. They never pulled a trigger, but they funded every bullet. And in the cracked wards of Munich's hospitals, healing begins, without answers. July 1904, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. As the war rages on, representatives from 4 allied nations gather in a secluded hotel to plan the future of global finance. Their goal: prevent another Great Depression, prevent another war. They debate fiercely: gold standards, currency exchange rates, how to rebuild shattered economies. One proposal, delivered quietly by a British delegation, sends a chill through the room: shut down the Bank for International Settlements. John Maynard Keynes himself, once a supporter, now calls the BIS a monument to bad intentions, a relic of appeasement, a bank that had quietly served Nazi interests through the darkest years. But the Americans object. Harry Dexter White, the U.S. Treasury official leading the talks, argues the BIS has a role in post-war economic coordination. It's stable, useful, quiet. And so, with little fanfare, the plan to abolish the BIS is shelved. Months later, the war ends. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank are born. Shiny, modern institutions for a new age. Yet the BIS remains. It continues operating from Basel, Switzerland, never indicted, never truly investigated. Many of its wartime staff remain in place. The gold it held, including stolen reserves, is never fully returned. Its legacy is whitewashed beneath a new mission: financial stability. Today, the BIS calls itself the Bank for Central Banks. It plays a key role in global finance, quiet, powerful, unseen. But behind that glassy facade lies a truth rarely spoken. The war ended. The bankers' war did not. And Bretton Woods didn't bury the past. It enshrined it. 1948. Berlin is divided. Europe is rebuilding. And the official story of the war begins to take shape. In school books, radio broadcasts, and newsreels, the narrative is simple. Evil was defeated. Democracy triumphed. The world has learned its lesson. But the lesson, at least one of them, is missing. There is no chapter about the banks. No mention of MIFO bills or Swiss vaults. No accounting for oil tankers or punch card machines. No questions about how the Third Reich survived years of sanctions, or who helped it buy tungsten, steel, and fuel. Governments steer attention elsewhere. So do the press. The public, exhausted and grieving, accepts the version they are given. Silence becomes policy. In the United States, the Red Scare overshadows wartime profiteering. Anti-communist hysteria wipes out any appetite for reckoning with corporate complicity. In Europe, economic recovery depends on fast growth and functional institutions, including the very banks that enabled the Reich. In Germany, thousands of mid-level Nazi collaborators are reintegrated into post-war society because someone must run the ministries, the factories, the ledgers. But for Holocaust survivors, displaced families, and war orphans, the silence is deafening. They watch as the powerful rebuild their careers. They see the names of firms that once backed genocide return to stock exchanges, law firms, and prestigious circles. No public apology, no restitution, just rebranding. The cost of looking away is high, not just in justice denied, but in history distorted. Because when silence wins, the truth becomes a rumor, and a rumor fades. The war ended in 1945. The cities were rebuilt. The world moved on. But one question never went away. What happens when the engines of war are powered not just by ideology, but by capital? For 6 years, the world watched the rise and fall of Adolf Hitler. The tanks, the speeches, the horror. But underneath the steel and fire was a quiet hum, the sound of money changing hands. Some of it was legal, much of it was not. All of it mattered. From Manhattan to Berlin, Basel to Buenos Aires, banking empires and industrial giants fueled a war machine they never had to face. They operated behind facades of neutrality, behind corporate layers and diplomatic loopholes. While soldiers died in trenches and civilians perished in gas chambers, contracts were honored, shipments made, profits banked. And when the war was over, those same institutions re-emerged, unshaken. The Swiss banks that held Nazi gold still exist. The BIS still influences global currency policy. American oil, steel, and tech companies that partnered with the Third Reich were never held to account. Why? Because acknowledging the truth would have meant facing a different kind of guilt. Not the guilt of hate, but the guilt of indifference, of profit over principle, of men in boardrooms deciding, quietly, not to care. This is not conspiracy. It's documentation. Investigative reports, declassified files, confessions, and ledgers. In '98, after mounting pressure, Swiss banks finally agreed to pay $1.25 billion to Holocaust survivors and families, more than 50 years late. A tiny fraction of the gold, art, and assets they once managed. In 2000, lawsuits against American corporations tied to Nazi Germany began. Most were dismissed. Settlements were small. Non-disclosure agreements kept details sealed. No executive was tried. No bank was dissolved. No system was overhauled. Today, the world still turns on credit, investment, and trade. The institutions that once enabled fascism now claim to safeguard democracy. They fund elections, underwrite treaties, manage the global economy. But the question lingers like smoke. If the same conditions emerged, economic chaos, populist fury, profitable war, would it happen again? Would the bankers speak up? Or would they, once more, go silent? Because in the end, this story isn't about Germany. It's not even about 1945. It's about what happens when silence becomes strategy, when evil is someone else's problem, when profit has no memory, when neutrality becomes complicity. The ledgers survived, the vaults stayed locked, the books balanced, and that may be the most unsettling truth of all. The human cost of World War II is etched into our collective memory. 85 million lives lost, continents scarred, generations haunted. But the financial cost, the enablers, the profiteers, the banks that never bled, remains largely forgotten, or worse, ignored. This story is not a revision of history. It is a reminder that behind every warhead lies a budget, behind every invasion, a transaction, and behind every silence, a choice. Was World War II engineered by banks? Maybe not with blueprints and speeches, but in offices and boardrooms, with ink and signatures, with risk assessments and interest rates. It was financed, enabled, protected, and when it was over, it was buried,